What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Cubs Live podcast. I am your host, Kyle Malzhan, alongside co-host Mark Talarico, and some Cubs news finally happened. And we're only about 2-3 weeks into the offseason now. The Cubs fired hitting coach Chili Davis and hired Anthony Iapoce to fulfill that role. Now, Iapoce was with the Cubs organization from probably late around 2012 to 2015, and he was a special assistant to the GM and their minor league hitting coordinator. He's familiar with guys like Kyle Schwarber, Ian Happ, Baez, Bryant. Guys that he has worked with are still on the team, and guys that were brought up to hit for power that was suddenly gone in 2018. So, Mark, I got to ask you, how do you feel about this hiring? Because I feel real good. I'm not too sure if I have a strong feeling, but I have a good feeling. And as long as Chili is out of the question, that's a win-win for me.
Well, to put in perspective of how admittedly little I know about Iapoce, I initially thought his last name was pronounced LaPoste because I thought it was an L instead of an I. When I first saw him, like, who is this guy? And I needed to realize, oh, that's actually an I instead of an L. So I admittedly didn't know a lot about him. But looking back on it, it looks like he's basically like a project prodigy kind of thing of what the Cubs had previously before Chili Davis, which I don't think is really a problem. And like you said, he's familiar with all of the guys or at least a lot of the guys. And I think that's going to be very important because I don't think that Theo and company would have brought in some guy that say that Chris Bryant didn't connect well with him, Javi, Contreras. If those guys didn't connect well with him in the minors, then I highly doubt that Theo would have re-signed him and brought him in because as we've seen with Chili Davis, which we'll get into that in a little bit, you can't have that and have success. So I think that it's a good sign, and I'm sure that the players are okay with it because I imagine that Theo probably talked to them about it, different guys that can like different candidates and how they felt about him because the front office they talk to players about that kind of thing, I'm sure. So overall, I feel good about it. He has a pretty good resume in a way. I mean, the Rangers, they hit for some power. They have 9 guys that hit 17 home runs. Like that's a lot more than the Cubs had. So that's a step in the right direction. I don't know. How do you feel about it exactly?
Yeah. So how I feel about it is Chili Davis isn't there, right? And Chili Davis is a guy who works old school. He has an old school delivery, and we're going to get about him and his quotes, what he had to say after being released by the Cubs. But for Iapoce, I mean, if we're concerned about the Cubs not getting the ball in the air, in 2007, Iapoce was with the Rangers, and the Rangers placed second place in MLB in 2017 at 4.8% with barreling the ball per plate appearance, which that's huge for Cubs hitters. If they get a barrel on that ball, they're a power net group that can drive the ball into the air, put it in the seats, and get back to the Cubs team we know, right? I mean, that's the Cubs team that a lot of people know, and that's what they've been known for, is to hit for power, and we didn't see that with Chili Davis. So now with Iapoce coming in, I expect that to, some of it doesn't fall on Chili Davis, but I think a lot does. So we're going to see the transition. Now, like I said, Chili Davis is out, and he was interviewed by a local news station after being let go by the Cubs, and he left with this quote. I'm going to say it in quotes. Certain players are going to have to make some adjustments there because the game's changed, and players and pitchers are pitching them differently. They're not pitching to launch angles and fly balls and none of that anymore. They're pitching away from that. They're going to have to make that adjustment whether I'm there or not, end quote. For me, that was a silly quote because we are in an era of home runs. The Yankees this season just set a record for most home runs by a team in one single season. And I know they have Aaron Judge, they got Stanton, they got DeGorius. I mean, they have all these players, but yet they're still finding the ball. They're still finding the seats with the ball. And just like last year in 2017, the league as a whole set a record with 6,105 home runs. That's the most they've ever seen in MLB history. So it's hard for me to believe that we're turning away from the home runs, because we're living in a home run era and the game is heavily dependent on homers. So how do you feel about Chili leaving us with that quote?
The thing about Chili is that in theory, I don't disagree with what his philosophy is and what he's saying. Yes, like getting on base, taking the pitch count, making it like not all hit or miss, not all about hitting the ball 450 feet. I agree with that in a sense. But when you look at the guys the Cubs have, you can't shy away from that. You have Chris Bryant, who look at the first 2 years of his career, even 2017 when he was healthy. Look at how he's done. We have Wilson Contreras, who has 20-plus home run ability as a catcher Anthony Rizzo's good for 30 a year. You know how much Schwarber can hit. Javi's coming into his own. All of these guys have this power, and you can't really change them away from that. You can try to influence them more to focus more on base percentage and all that, but I feel like it was just like, if it's like a teeter-totter of like power and getting on base, it was like more power, but now it's suddenly like, whoa, completely on base, and then the Cubs don't have a whole lot of contact hitters, and it's not going to work. There's no point of having people on base if you're not going to be able to actually move them over. It's good in theory, but it didn't work with the Cubs. Will it work with some other teams? I'm sure it will, but we could ask the Red Sox how they're doing without Chili Davis, and I think they're doing pretty fine.
And they're playing in the ALCS where the Cubs aren't playing in the NLCS. And that's a change for Cubs fans and Cubs players, because they've been familiar with the NLCS the last 3 years, and then now this fourth year, they didn't get past the wild card game. They didn't get a 4 or 5 game, 7 game series like they have in the past. So it's a little different than them. And I feel like now that they know that they fell 1 game short, where they could have won 1 game in the last week, they could have won game 163, they could have won the wild card game, they could have had that spot in guaranteed playoff spheres. And let's be real, they didn't perform. And a lot of that's going to fall on Chili Davis, and it did, and he's out. So, I mean, kudos to Chili Davis. You know, I don't have too hard feelings with Chili Davis. I just know that it didn't work out with the Cubs, and that's the reality of it. I don't know where his future lies, but the Cubs have moved on.
And in regards to his comments itself, I think people they're putting too much on Chili Davis, because when you're a professional, like, it's not everything falls on the hitting coach, because at the end of the day, Kyle Schwarber is going to do what Kyle Schwarber wants to do, along with Javi and Chris Bryant, all those guys. But that's why I think that it's important that they have a working relationship. And he basically came out and said that he was not able to connect with the players. If you're a coach on any level, if you're any sort of coach, and I can speak from my own experience from being an athlete and all this different kind of stuff, and I'm sure you can too from different sports, anybody can. If you don't really agree with your coach and you can't rally around him, you're not going to play well. And I think that's what we're seeing, because we didn't know exactly how they connected with Chili Davis, but not only did the coaching philosophies not work, but apparently they didn't get along. If those things aren't working for you, that's not going to work. They're already bringing in a guy in Iapose who he clearly connected well with them, because they're bringing him back. So I think that's a better start to begin with. I don't even care what he does hitting-wise. The fact that they get along, that's going to go a long ways.
Absolutely. And there was reports, and I don't know if you would call it reports, but he gets along with the organization very well received with the players. So that's a huge plus going forward. Now, side note of things, the free agency market this year, frontliners Machado, Harper. I personally expect the Cubs to be very active on one of them. I don't know who yet, but I do expect them to be active. Now, Manny Machado, who's been a very good player in the league since coming into it, from the god-awful Orioles to the Dodgers, and that's where we're at. The Dodgers versus the Brewers in the NLCS. Game 5 is going on. 7th inning as we record this. 4-1, Dodgers up, 1 out, 2 on for the Dodgers. Anyway, so that's where we're at, right? Where there's been some drama involving Machado. Machado, first of all, showing that he's not hustling, and some people wanted him to, and in quotes, he says this, start quote, "I'm not the player that's going to be Johnny Hustle. That's just not my personality," end quote. Then there was that play where he kind of wrapped up RC on a slide. And to follow that up, Machado tried taking out Aguilar's ankle at first base, running down the line, which the bench is cleared, but nothing came out of it. He got fined later. The Brewers had some choice words for it, including Yelich calling it a dirty play from a dirty player. And I think he may have a point, because Machado does kind of somewhat have a rep for being a dirty player. Now, we know Joe Madden, how he preaches respect 90. That's a huge thing for him. And now with Machado kind of going, the opposite on record and saying, look, right before his free agency mark, I'm not that Johnny Hustle guy. Do you think these tactics are going to affect his free agency mark? And bigger than that, do you think Theo's watching this and taking notes?
Well, I think that it's a very dumb strategy. I think that Machado, he's kind of acting like a prima donna in a way, because he's saying like, oh, I'm not going to be hustling all the time. That's not who I am. And then I think it was like the day after was game 4 where he did all those things. It was tripping up Aguilar, I believe, at first base or whatever. But like, looking back on that play, that looks childish. That looks immature. You don't want that from like your franchise player that you're going to dedicate upwards of $300 million to. At the end of the day, though, baseball is baseball. Just like how I'm sure Addison Russell is going to be playing for somebody in 2019, Manny Machado is going to be making $200 to $300 million next year. As much as, you know, all the old school guys and even myself, I don't like what Manny Machado is. I don't what he's doing. I don't think anybody really likes what he's doing, but he's still going to go somewhere because Manny Machado is one of the best players in baseball. So I don't think it's going to impact him that much. I think it will take some of the old school player teams out of the mix. Like, I don't know. I imagine, you know, I'm not trying to hate, but like the Cardinals probably don't want a guy like that because that's not the Cardinal way. But like, that's just an example. You know, you don't want that on your team. When it comes to the Cubs, I mean, overwhelmingly it's Bryce Harper, and it's been Bryce Harper for years. You know, that's our right fielder, all that kind of stuff. So I don't think that was going to change, but I think this is cementing that, if anything, because Theo is definitely taking notes. Theo's playing chess when everybody else is playing checkers. He's 5 moves ahead of everybody. So I'm sure he probably already knew this about Machado, but this isn't going to help any sort of pursuit, I don't think.
Absolutely. And my biggest thing is I think this has always been Machado, right? And now he's playing not for the Orioles. He's playing in LA, a Hollywood team, a team that's going to get attention. And the teams that are in the NLCS and getting the media love. And now we're seeing it on a bigger scale of just what Machado entails and who he is as a player. And there's no need for that in baseball, what he did yesterday when, you know, tripping up Aguilar and all that stuff. There's no need for it. And just like a few years ago when he was playing on the Orioles, he missed a pitch and he tried to throw the bat at the pitcher. And just stuff like that, there's no need for baseball. There's one thing when you're trying to hurt a player, and there's another thing where you're bat flipping and getting the crowd excited and it rubs the other team the wrong way, which that's Bryce Harper. And I have no problem with Bryce Harper doing that because that brings that kind of swagger to the team, and that's who the Cubs are. Swagger, swagger, swagger. You got Javier Baez, you got Wilson Contreras, everything else.
Yeah. And also, I think that Harper has a good connection. I mean, anytime that he's in Chicago, you see Rizzo messing around with him. We already know that he's good friends with Chris Bryant. You know that already. But one thing about Manny Machado that I haven't really seen this being talked about or anything, but we remember earlier on towards the end of the summer when Cole Hamels went on record and said that I don't think the Brewers and Cubs have much of a rivalry because how could you have much of a rivalry when there are more Cubs fans than Brewers fans in Milwaukee, which not trying to start anything, obviously. But if this rivalry was to take the next step, Manny Machado, if he was the shortstop for the Cubs, oh my God, can you imagine every single time? Because they're not going to forget what he did. They're not going to forget this series in general, just like kind of how a lot of Cubs players Cubs fans had a hard time accepting the fact that Daniel Murphy was on the Cubs. And that's just because he hit 30 home runs in 2015. So I think that while I don't really want it, it would be very interesting and there would be a lot of drama, a lot more drama if Manny Machado was a Cub for years to come.
Can you imagine that? I mean, with all the fan bases between the Milwaukee fans and Cubs fans finally investing in this rivalry, and now you got the players going at it too. Mm-hmm. You got Machado. If he were to come to the Cubs, you got him and Aguilar. Obviously, Aguilar said everything's good. It seemed as though on Fox Sports, they showed them hugging and talking it out last night. But you also had Christian Yelich calling him a dirty player. You had Craig Counsell saying that, you know, he's not hustling. All these other factors to tie into two teams if Machado were to come to the Cubs. So it could get very, very interesting. And hey, since we're talking about 2019 and what it can entail, which, let's face it, we're not in the postseason, so why not? So when you look to 2019 for the Cubs, who do you think has a breakout year and why? And I'm going to go first. So you think about it for a little bit. I'm going to go first. I'm going to go with Wilson Contreras. Wilson Contreras did not have the year he wanted, as Cubs fans wanted, the organization didn't want, and Theo recognized that. And Contreras is a guy who maybe since he played a lot more than he ever has, that kind of fatigued him a little bit. Who knows? Should have put up better numbers. He's going to be hungry. That's my guy who's going to have a breakout year next year.
Well, I'm actually a little upset because I was gonna say Wilson Contreras myself, and I think that, I mean, he was emotional. He's probably the emotional leader, I would say, of the Cubs. He's such an emotional guy, and you love that in your backstop. And you saw how visibly upset he was with himself and everything in general after that wild card game. So I think that he is going to have a great bounce back year. But I think that if we're going to talk about somebody who's going to like emerge, I mean, how about bounce back Chris Bryant? He's going to take care of himself. He's going to be ready to go. He's not happy with how he did, and everybody knows that. He's kind of getting written off now. People are forgetting about him, that he's one of the best players in baseball. I know that Chris Bryant, this is the one year, I think, probably in his entire baseball career of his life that he hasn't been an absolute superstar, top 10 player in the league. So that's not going to happen again. I don't think that's going to happen again. I think that we should expect 30-plus home runs, just a typical Chris Bryant season. I think that should definitely be expected for years to come. And I hope that, let's just say, Yu Darvish. I don't know. I don't know. I keep on kind of forgetting that Yu Darvish is a Cub because we only won one game. But people forget that he does have the best of all of baseball of all time, the best K-9 ratio ever. So let's not forget that Yu Darvish, if he's healthy, is absolutely filthy.
Yeah, he is. You're absolutely right. And with Chris Bryant, I'm wondering what his swing's going to look like in 2019. Obviously, pre-injury, his shoulder injury in 2018 and through 2015, his follow-through, he let that left hand go, right? And now when he came back from it, he had two hands on the bat, and it looked very awkward. I mean, there's no going around it. It looked awkward. It looked ugly. His power numbers were down. So I figure that him and his dad, Mike, are going to, work this offseason, work on whatever, getting him healthy. That's number one, but making sure he's comfortable at the plate while staying healthy. So it's going to be interesting. And like you said, this is probably the first time in Bryant's career that he's not a top 10 player in the league he's playing in. So I know that doesn't sit well with him. And post-game of the wild card game, he was in tears. And you don't see that from Chris Bryant because he's not a very emotional guy. He doesn't show excitement, really. He's just that player that goes along with his business. And he was visually upset. And I don't think that sat well with him. So just like him and a lot of players, they're going to grind. They're going to remember that 163 game. They're going to remember that wild card game, go into the offseason, fix it, come back in 2019 into spring training with a redemption, right? I mean, redemption mindset. And it's going to be fun to watch. And like you said, Cubs still have Yu Darvish. He won one game as a Cub. Cubs won 95 games. I mean, that's the goal, right? I mean, you win 95 games, and they did it without their, I wouldn't say ace, but one of their most important pieces in the rotation that didn't pan out. So a lot of moving pieces going forward in 2019, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about still in the offseason, but it's been a fun time already. I mean, we've seen changes, and now the free agency market is going to heat up in the next month or so. So I'm excited for it. I know you are, Mark, and that just about does it for the Cubs Live podcast. So I'm Kyle. He's Mark. Thanks for tuning in, and go Cubs.